Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our first healthcare user meetup. We plan on having several of these meetings, so we've gotten quite a few questions from users that we'd like to be going over today, but throughout the webinar, if you'd like to be adding to that list, please feel free to add more questions. Hopefully we will be able to address most of these, but as I mentioned, we will be having, this is the first of many meetings like this that we'll be having. So if there are other topics that we need to address, we would love to have another call and go over those. For today's agenda, we will be talking about some use cases from UNC, and then we'll be going over some of the questions that we have gotten from the audience. On the call with me today is Randy Hester, the technical consultant here at Eggplant. He's been with us for about 2.5 years now, working with our healthcare customers. I am also joined by Dave Hester, who is the testing coordinator at UNC. He's one of our super users and has some great use cases that he will be sharing with us today. Before I hand things over to Dave, I'd just like to mention some recent news here from Eggplant. We have been recognized by the Forrester Wave as a market leader. And in part, this is because of our product roadmap, including the Eggplant AI features and functionality. A big piece of this, too, is coming from user feedback. And so we'd love to hear from you guys and understand what it is that you guys would like to see from us. So we'd love to get more information from you as to what you'd like to see from us in the healthcare space. So like I said, I will go ahead and hand things over to Dave for a little bit here and let him tell us about some of the use cases that he has at UNC.
Thank you, Jimmy. So a few items before we get started. As you can see, the slide in front of you describes who we are at UNC Healthcare. I'm not one of those people who likes reading slides out loud to you. But it is important to understand that we are an academic facility and we are a multiple hospital. Before we get into actual case studies, I'd like to talk a little bit about what it is we use Eggplant for in 3 main categories. Category number 1 is the very category that many of you who are currently using Eggplant with your EMR are doing, and that is using Eggplant for the purposes of facilitating manual testing. That is creating test patients, maybe even admitting patients to beds or scheduling appointments, but with the idea that the testing itself is going to be conducted by an analyst, whether that's somebody on the QA team, if you have a QA team, or whether that's one of your build analysts, but in essence, not really using Eggplant for the purpose of testing, but rather for the purpose of making testing easier. The second thing to be mindful of is we also use Eggplant for integrated and regression testing. In Epic, we have an electronic medical record that gets updated quite frequently. And because of that, it's very important for us to run regression testing to, as we say, make sure that those things that ain't broke stay not broke. And with that in mind, we have moved a number of our scripts off of manual testing and over to integrated testing. That includes test cases such as outpatient with a research study, ED to IP, and scripts of that nature. Those very important workflows that we consider essential to the running of our business, that if they were to be broken by an update to the software, we would be impacted either financially or from a significant patient safety issue. What I'd like to talk about today are a couple of test cases that don't fall into either of those 2 categories, and that is using Eggplant Functional and Eggplant Manager for the purposes of testing systems that are ancillary to our primary EMR. Our first test case involves a vendor-neutral archive. As we were doing post-go-live analysis, we found out that a couple of our dermatology practices had been taking pictures of patients and storing them on local hard drives. Well, not only was that a great concern to us from a HIPAA standpoint, but also it made things very difficult when other specialists might need to see those pictures. So we determined that we were going to move those photographs to a vendor-neutral archive. Well, when we purchased our vendor-neutral archive, originally the vendor said, oh yes, we can absolutely upload these, we can catalog them, associate them with patients, establish what date of service each one of these pictures is associated with, but those were all the sorts of platitudes that you get when you purchase a system. Once they actually did the deep dive, saw the types of photographs that we were talking about, in many cases very, very sensitive photographs, the vendor actually backpedaled a bit and said, no, we really can't do this for you. We're going to need you to upload your own photos. Well, that presented us with two problems. With one set of photographs, ones which were less sensitive in terms of which body parts were being photographed, the issue was that at the time that those photographs were saved onto that hard drive, the patient's name was included, but the medical record number was not. And the provider told us, well, you know, the first slide in each package in our file system contains a photograph of the patient's patient label. Can't you just go into each one of these photographs and determine what the medical record number is based on the photograph of the patient label? So our issue was that the volumes were very, very high. Staffing was not such that that was something that was easily done manually. So instead what I did is I wrote an Eggplant script that could do OCR, or optical character recognition, against a photograph of the patient label for each one of those photographs. The wonderful part about using Eggplant is it was flexible, but also allowed me to make lots of tweaks, because there may be some of you who are currently using Eggplant that are saying, how did you do that? There's no guarantee that the zoom level on one patient label is going to be the same as another. This isn't a screenshot that we're trying to do OCR against. It's actual photographs. In some cases, there may be more than one patient label displayed. How do you make sure that you get the same one each time? But luckily, the OCR tweaks that are available via OCR Tuner were such that we could ultimately determine the right algorithm for picking out the medical record number. We had about an 82% initial success rate, which we could then bounce up against our electronic medical record to verify that those MRNs were correct. And for the last 18, we were typically within 1 or 2 digits, which when we ran reports out of our EMR for those dates of service, we could very quickly match up to say, hey, this is how we were, this is the digit that we were off by. And ultimately, it made things very smooth, and over the course of about 2 weeks, we managed to load north of 8,000 images into our vendor-neutral archive. Once that was accomplished, we were presented with a very different type of issue, and this was an issue where we had the medical record number as part of the file name, but the images were so sensitive that we didn't necessarily want to even hand them to an intern or a college student or even somebody necessarily within our information services department. These were full body scans for people who are at a high risk for skin cancer, and really we wanted to put the emphasis on having these photographs available to as few sets of eyes as possible. Well, that was a perfect use case for Eggplant, because as that Eggplant script was running, it could run either via Manager, which would be completely in the background, or even running it from Functional itself. It was easy enough to hide the window for the system under test, and therefore those photographs were not presented to human beings for review and any of the types of patient privacy issues that might be associated with that. In that particular case, we played in just over 17,000 images, and now that those successes are behind us, as you might well imagine, hard drives, thumb drives, things of that nature are now coming out of the woodwork, and what we thought was initially a project in of itself, something that had an appropriate completion time, has actually become 2 pilot projects for a much larger project to feed images into our vendor-neutral archive. The other advantage that we had, particularly when we looked at this side by side with some of the images that were loaded into the file system on these hard drives, is that Eggplant types in the exact characters that you tell it to type in. So if you do an extract of your electronic medical record and you say, these are the medical record numbers, Eggplant's never going to fat finger that number. In many cases, what we saw with that second set of images is as those numbers were being keyed into the file system, it was not uncommon for 2 digits to be transposed or a digit to be swapped in inadvertently based on its location on a 10-key keypad. Well, we would have had the very same issues if we had turned this project over to any live human being and asked that human being to key in electronic medical records. With that in mind, we were able to use Eggplant to ensure that the data quality that we were feeding it in terms of an Excel spreadsheet was reflected identically by what was put into the gaming system, that is our vendor-neutral archive. The second case study involves a product called SafeTrace. I'm not sure whether how many of you might be familiar with that particular product. It's a blood bank product. We use it alongside of our electronic medical record. And a case came to us about 13, 14 days ago where somebody said, you know, our latest upgrade to SafeTrace broke all of the batch processes that we had to create billing files, to FTP them to a server, to have those loaded into Epic, and then ultimately determine that the file has been transmitted. Could you very quickly do all of this in Eggplant? Well, because we already had scripts in Eggplant that would launch Epic and look up a patient, then taking modules from those scripts allowed us very easily to take care of the Epic portion of it because we were dealing with a fairly straightforward GUI in terms of the Safe Trace reporting application itself. Generating those files was very simple, and compared to what they were previously doing, which was to verify that the file got generated, to go into Epic. For those of you who know Epic and might know Revenue Cycle, to go into the charge router reconciliation report and make sure that there was a number greater than 0. I then went to them and said, okay, well that's nice, and that's what your old process did, the one that you were perfectly happy with for years, but I'm a testing coordinator. Shouldn't this throw some sort of red flag if the number of charges in the file doesn't match the number of charges that come out of charge router? And they said, well, you know, we couldn't do that with the old-fashioned batch file. Can you do that with Eggplant? And I said, of course. What we're going to do is we're going to go into the PDF that contains our total number of charges. We'll select that item out. We'll store it into a variable. We'll then switch systems under test so that we can go into Epic. We'll launch Hyperspace. We'll run the charge router reconciliation report. We'll find the totals from there. We'll store that in a separate variable. We'll compare those two variables mathematically, and only if those numbers match up do we consider it to be a true success. Which means not only did we automate an existing process, we added in guardrails that weren't there before, and that was to make sure that we weren't somehow losing charges as we were moving them across the interface into Epic. So with that in mind, those are our two big non-Epic, that is to say non-EMR case studies. And with that, I will certainly reserve some time for those questions that I know you have. But before that happens, I'll turn things back over to Jimmy.
Thanks a lot, Dave. It's really interesting to hear some of the use cases that you have outside of your EMR. So it's great to hear those right from you. So we might be coming back to ask some questions specifically around your testing on your EMR. But for now, what I'd like to do is move forward to some of the other questions that we have. We did get quite a few folks asking for a live demonstration of Eggplant. And so what I'd like to do is give Randy some time to actually show Eggplant in action. And as you guys are aware, this is a user meetup specifically for folks who are using the software. There are a couple folks who are interested in learning a bit more about how Eggplant works. And if you're interested in that, we'd be happy to set up a tailored demonstration for you outside of this. This is more tailored for folks who are currently using the software. So one of the questions that we got was specifically to writing scripts so that they can be more consistent and getting more reliable runs out of the scripts that are written. So I'd like to give some time here to Randy so that he can take over and show us scripting and scripting in a way that's going to give you consistent runs. Randy, I will hand it over to you.
Cool. Thanks, Jimmy. Let me share my screen here. All right. There we go. All right. So what I have in front of me is the Eggplant functional application here, my system under test here, and of course my run window right over here. So of course, just in case, I know there's a few people online who understand Eggplant functional is a two-system model. So I'm on a Mac computer, but I'm controlling a Windows computer remotely. And basically, I can put any application on this Windows computer, and I can control it remotely. So it doesn't matter what the application is. I can do pretty much anything I want in terms of controlling this application. All right, so let's start doing some scripting. So I'm going to walk through kind of the manual workflow of actually how I add a patient, and then what I'll do is I'll create a script to do that and kind of talk about, I'll have some talking points of exactly what needs to be scripted and images that need to be captured. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to manually log into the EMR system. Now, I do have a EMR system called OpenEMR. It's just like any other EMR system, EHR system. This is just an open source one, essentially. But how I control the OpenEMR is exactly how I would control an Epic system, an Allscripts system, a Cerner system, eClinicalWorks. Pretty much the exact way I'm going to control my OpenEMR is exactly how I'm going to control any EMR system or any application in general. All right. So let's just talk about the manual process of adding a new patient, and then I'll walk through the automated process. This script is assuming that I already have a script to log in, and now I'm just going to do about patient creation. So how do I create a patient? I'm going to go to Patient Clients, which is a hover. So I'm actually hovering my mouse over, and then I'm going to use the mouse to click on New Search. Then I have to wait for this screen to load. Once it's loaded, I will put my patient in here. Let's just say it's John Doe. So I'll type in John, click over here, type in A, click over here, and click on Doe. Now when I'm done with filling out all the forms, I simply click on Create New Patient, which creates my patient. I'm not going to click on it right now because I don't want like 50, 60 patients in my system, but I will walk through at least one patient in terms of full demonstration and clicking. All right. So when we log in, we're assumed that we're on the screen and this menu is showing. So the first thing I'm going to script is the idea of move to here and click on this. So again, capture mode, get this little square, move this to patient clients. Right now, in terms of capturing image, I'm not going to capture this whole thing and say, okay, click on this specifically. I really want to do something small like this. I'll try not to do something like this, so I'll try to keep the square as tight as possible, essentially. That should be good. All right, then I'm going to associate a move to. Since I'm mousing over it, I'm not actually clicking on it. I'm going to do move command, which will do a hover. All right, I'll get this screen, patient client's fine. Since it is text, I'll probably just leave it as smooth, which is fine. Click on save. All right, there's my first line and my first command. All right, and then I'm going to click on new patient. So again, take this box, highlight it, drop, and say click. All right, new patient, save. All right, so there are my images. Right, they both should be set to smooth, kind of what I use for the best practice. Right, and now if you notice, when I do this manually, this page sometimes takes a minute to load. You see how it's white and then it goes back? So the problem here is sometimes when I execute the click, the image might not show up correctly. So what I'm going to do is before I type information into here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to capture mode. I'm going to look for essentially add patient, this text, and I'm going to do a wait for command. This will allow me to wait for the image before proceeding code. Because of that screen that sometimes it takes longer to load, what I'm doing is I'm waiting for this information to load before I start clicking on things. This will help with sync issues. When they talk about consistency, this is what it really is about. It's really about wait and wait for. Waiting for images to show up or waiting a certain amount of time to elapse to make sure that things are working correctly. Wait for is going to be your best bet, though, in this case, because I'm waiting for an object to show before I move forward with my script. So I'll click on wait for. We'll say we'll wait for 8 seconds here, which is fine. Smooth is all good. And I'll call my image name add patient. Click on save. All right. Then here's my code so far, right? So move to this, click on this, wait for this image. Right. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to type in John A. Doe. So again, when I'm doing fields, this is not the image I want to capture. The reason why that's not the image I want to capture is because this image looks like every other image on this screen. Okay? So I really don't want to use this as an image. Okay? I also don't want to do this. Right? I'm looking for this white space essentially. This white space is in every screen, so I'm not going to use that. So what I'm going to do is do image offset. Basically, I'm going to look for this image, but click over here by moving the little red X to hotspot. I'll drop this down and say click. Okay, we'll call this name. Click on save. Right, there we go. So we clicked onto name. Now we can do a type text to type our patient information in here. So we'll do type text, John. Okay. So run this one line of command, right? We'll type John right in there. Not a problem. Now that being said, when I perform this manually, you see I click John, then I clicked into here to type in A, and then I clicked into here to type in Del. Okay, that's one route of doing it. However, right, that would allow me to capture 3 images. So I would have to capture name, then I would have to capture name again to move the pointer, over here to click middle name, and then capture name again to click over here to do last name. Instead of doing that, I'm going to take a little bit of a shortcut. The shortcut is, instead of using the mouse to click through fields, I'm going to use tab. There we go, tab key, right, to kind of move from one field to the next. When you're doing EMR systems, tab key is the best bet to use. So try to stick with as many keyboard shortcuts as possible. This way you don't have to capture as many images, and it allows easier maintenance when you deal with type text versus images. If images changes, you might have to do some maintenance, but if you do a lot of shortcut keys, it's less maintenance. So this is less maintenance on your part, so that's why I highly recommend doing that. All right, so we'll do type text that, then type text A, and finally type text tab key, right, because I got a tab for middle name, and then finally, yeah, okay. So if I press play by running the scripts, which will do the following things. So if I press play here, right, patient, new patient, wait for that to load, John, A, go. So now that I've scripted this little guy, the first thing I want to do is run it a few more times to make sure it's consistent. Meaning every time I press play, it should do exactly the same thing. Okay, and one more time. Right, patient, new patient, John, A, yeah. Awesome. So pretty good on the consistency, which is great to hear. Now, if I did this, I can click instead of move to, you'll see it might error out because you're not supposed to be clicking on that thing, right? See how it clicked on the menu, but it didn't drop down? Because it's not meant for a click, which means I can't find the click new search. So what will happen is the script will fail out, essentially. Here's the error message. There's the error message. Cannot find image, right? So basically, this image does not exist on this screen. And as you can see it in that drop-down menu, that image does not exist on that screen. So when you're coding Eggplant, when you're coding these scripts, right, it's really important to understand, which commands to use and what it waits for. When you see that error, all it's saying that we can't find this image on that screen. That's all that error is saying. Now, in terms of when it finds it and when it doesn't find it, you have to look at the previous steps to figure out when it was. For instance, if I couldn't find name, that means that I may have not waited for this image correctly. I might not have found this image correctly, or I might not have found this image correctly. Anything that breaks usually means the code above is not working correctly. So it is something to take into consideration. Okay? Like I said, when I ran the click command, this is what broke, but this was the actual issue. So it's not necessarily that the code that it's not working on is the issue. It might be the code above that that allows navigation to get there. So it's something to take into account when you're troubleshooting this. All right. So most customers like to see kind of the, that's great that we can create one patient, but let's say we wanted to create like, a list of patients. So what I have here is a CSV file. Let me just open this in Excel. And there we go. Drag it over here. So that's my Excel document of the patients. Notice I have, essentially, I have 10 lines, but 9 patients. Okay? something to keep in mind. We'll talk about that momentarily. But again, 10 lines, right? Because this header is 1 line. So I have 10 lines of code, but I have 9 patients. Just something to keep in mind. But what I'll do is I'll read this information from here. And this, what I'll do is I'll read the first name, middle name, and last name from this and put in here. So the first patient I'm going to write in here is going to be Bruce A. Wayne. The second is going to be Carrie B. Underwood, so on and so forth. All right? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this file, which is my CSV, move it to resource path. All right? Then I'm going to pull the data out of the resource path by doing the following command. Put file, this guy, into patient data. Now, if I log out this command here, log patient data, right? You can see all this stuff goes into that run window, right? There's my patient information, okay? Now, if I wanted to pull one line or one piece of information out of here, the code to do that is line 3 of patient information. Then if I run this one line, I will pull one single line out from this file. All right, let me go back to the CSV real quick. Research. All right, so this line is reading off this line from Excel, right? See, there it is. So line 3, which is 1, 2, 3, that line information is exactly what this line information is. Okay, no difference. All right, so if I pull line 3 out, right, I'm going to put this information into patients. Okay, if I log out patients, there we go, right? Again, it's just the information I want to log out. Okay, but I want to get the first, middle, and last name. So the first is this one, middle is that one, and last is that one. So that's item 2, 3, and 4. So if I put item 2 of patient into first name, all right, and I log out first name, run these guys, there's my first name. So let's do middle name and last name. So, right, so we'll copy this guy, paste, paste. So 3, 4, change this to first name to middle name, and then finally last name. So now I can say log, my patient is, and we'll say first name, middle name, and last name. Let me just close this guy. All right, so if I run this code right here, right, my patient is Carrie B. Underwood. Notice first name Carrie, B middle name, and Underwood. So all I'm doing is just pulling the data out, okay? So what we're going to do is now that we have this, instead of John, right, I'm going to replace John with first name. Instead of John, I'm going to say type text first name. Right, same thing with middle name. Right, same thing with last name. So now when I run the script, right, Carrie B. Underwood. So not only did I type in Carrie B. Underwood, it also logged exactly what patient I did. Now, of course, if I run this over and over again, it's just going to be Carrie B. Underwood, Carrie B. Underwood, Carrie B. Underwood. Right? We don't want that. So as I mentioned, let's consult this data a little bit. All right. So this number is what changes, right? Because if I said line 1, then all the code reflects that because, right, if I said line 1, here, or sorry, line 2 here, and I ran this code, right, it's a different patient. If I said line 5 here, right, and ran this code, right, different patient. So all I'm really doing is changing this number right here. Okay? So I want to create a repeat statement that will repeat this line of code every single time, and then it will change this number. Okay? So if I did repeat, we have 9 patients, so I'm going to say 9 times. All right, and I'm going to cut this out. Right? If I ran this code, and let's put it back to carry, right? Essentially, I'm going to create 9 carry Underwoods, and I really don't want that. Right? Carry the Underwood. Again, carry the Underwood. Right? I would create 9 carry B Underwoods. I seriously don't want that. Okay? So I have to figure out how to change this number. Okay? To do that, we're going to use a key command called repeat index. Repeat index. All right? Repeat index means when I run this loop at the first time, it starts at 1. When I run this loop at the second time, it starts at 2. Right? But if I said line 1 of patient data, that's the header information. So I really want to do it this way with a +1. Because that means, right, again, looking at my Excel sheet, that's just an Excel sheet. Looking at the Excel sheet, right, my patient starts at line 2, not at line 1. So I want to make sure it starts at line 2. All right? So now if I run it, right, Bruce A. Wayne. I should actually pull up the Excel sheet so you can see this. All right, Carrie B. Underwood. All right, Wonder C. Woman. And we're just going to go throughout the entire list. Okay. But let's make this script a little bit more robust. Okay. If I add or remove patients from the CSV, I have to change this number. Right? If I add 15 more patients, 13 more patients, or if I only have 1 patient in there, I have to constantly change this number. The goal is to make these scripts as robust as possible. All scripts should just depend pretty much on the data file. It's making sure that the information is contained in the data file before running my scripts. Okay? And if you don't have a data file, then making sure my information is stored in a variable instead. Okay? So what I'm going to do is say, okay, well, I can get back how many lines I have in this file, right? So again, in my Excel sheets, right? It keeps pulling up on the screen, right? So again, I have 10 lines, 9 patients, right? But what I can do, if I say put the number of lines of patient data into MAC, or patient count, I'll call it, right? And I'll log out patient counts. Okay? I just run these 3 lines of code. All right, look what returned, 10 lines. Now again, I'm counting how many lines are in this file. I only have 9 patients, so I need to do this. Right, just -1. So when I run it, because my header is not going to change. So when I run it, I have 9, essentially I have 9 patients. Okay? So instead of making sure it's 9 times, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this guy right here, copy, and paste. There we go. Okay? When I do that and I run this, right, we'll even log out, so we'll say we have patients. Okay? So now when I run it, I'll leave this guy over here. Right? So we have 9 patients, and my first patient is Bruce A. Wayne. Right? Bruce A. Wayne. Right? Now I'm going to do my second patient, which is Cardi B. Wood. So in terms of best practices, having long messages helps a lot to see where you are. Okay? Putting wait statements also helps to make sure that you're waiting for the proper information before next screen. not clicking on image offsets or using other images to click in for other places also helps as well. So this is kind of the best practice for everything. Now I'll introduce one more thing before I pass it back to Jimmy. And there was a small glitch in my script that I'm sure none of you noticed, but I did. Since I'm already on this screen and I run these 4 commands, which again is move to and click on this. When I click on this, Eggplant jumps to this command right away. So after this code is executed, it jumps to this code. Now, even before I actually click on it, right, before I click on new search, that image already exists on the screen, which means that Eggplant will find it and try to click on name, okay? Because the screen is moving slower than Eggplant functional. That is a problem because our scripts can run very, very fast, but the application might not be able to keep up. Okay, that's not an Eggplant issue. It's usually a application issue or a processing issue. Okay, but because of that, we still have to take into account load time. So what I'm going to do is put a little statement called a wait statement here. And what this wait statement really does is saying before clicking on this, before executing this guy, we're going to wait 1 second. So we're going to move to this, click this. We're going to do nothing for 1 second. Allowing us to do nothing for 1 second allows us to then look for this image. Because if we look for this image right away without this statement, right, we just jump right to it. So we really want to stall the system for at least 1 second before waiting for this. Now, at that point in terms of timing, notice this is 8 seconds. We can change this to 80. It does not matter. We're saying we're looking for this image within this amount of seconds. Okay, so when I run it, right, again, we're going to click patient, be patient, stall for a second, right, then look for the image, and then we can proceed. Okay, obviously, we did not wait 80 seconds for this. This says within 80 seconds, and this is stalling the script for 1 second to make sure the screen loads properly. There are a lot of EMR systems that have this issue. Basically, the UI UX loads before you can actually do anything. And if that happens, you're going to have to use this statement. It is a known issue in certain EMR systems that the UI UX will load before the functionality. So we have to take that into consideration. All right, thank you guys for watching my live presentation. I will now pass it back to Jimmy.
Thanks, Randy. And we will be calling on you for some follow-up questions as well. But thank you very much, and that's super helpful. I think it was great to get into some of the commands that you were able to show us during that presentation. There was a question around that. We will be working with our docs team to be listing out some of the more common use cases or terms that we use within Eggplant. And Randy, I really liked how you were talking about using keyboard commands, the log messages, and some other tips and tricks there to make sure that your scripts are robust. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So one of the questions that we got from one of the users here was, and we do have quite a few new users joining us here. So this is a great question. It is, what would be a tip or a trick that you would want to know just as you get started using Eggplant? And Dave, I know that you've been using Eggplant for a little while now, but if you can remember back to just when you were getting started with Eggplant, what was something that you wish that you had known as you were getting started?
Oh, sure. Thank you, Jimmy. That's a great question. So really two quick things. One, I wish at the very outset that I had insisted on my own test logins into my test environment. I've gotten them now, but I found that I was writing lots and lots of code to account for the idea that somebody could change the color scheme within my electronic medical record or change the positions of items on a menu or other things that, while I could teach Eggplant to work around them, was really bogging down my scripts and making a real management nightmare over time. So one thing that we did at UNC Healthcare is to determine that at least in the test environment, I could create a parallel set of model users for login into the system. And that way, it was easier for me to get to zero state. Zero state is the other half of this tip and trick, and that is in order to make sure that you're not writing a whole lot more code than you have to, I think it's really important to make sure that you are at a place in your electronic medical record where you've already closed all of your pop-ups, where you've already set up your system so that it's at a known color scheme or known preference. Because as long as each script that you run begins with returning your electronic medical record to that zero state, then that greatly reduces the number of false positives that you get in terms of failing scripts.
Excellent. Great. Thank you. And Randy, you get to work with a lot of customers as they're getting started with the software. Is there anything that you'd like to add to that?
No, I think Dave has a point. Is just understanding the system. From my standpoint, it's really about understanding what automation means in your environment, right? After I deploy an automation tool, what does that mean? And it really means, slimming down processes, weeding out certain things that could take long, just to make sure that processes are a little bit more efficient as possible to kind of streamline the process of automation. And of course, making sure there's enough time to understand automation. I would say that's the two kind of tips and tricks in terms of that.
Okay, great. So Dave, I've got a question for you specifically. We'd like to hear a little bit about your setup at UNC and how you have things structured. I did start the call off by saying that you are one of the super users that we have here at Eggplant, and you understand the software from the Eggplant side very well. But I'd like to hear a little bit about how you are doing things at UNC if you don't necessarily know the workflow as well as you need to in order to script it in Eggplant.
Sure. I think that's a great question. It dovetails into another one that was submitted via this chat, and that is how are we doing it at UNC in terms of staff, who's doing the scripting, etc. So I am a QA team of one. With that in mind, we still manage to do our scripting because we put a high emphasis on building as modular a script as we can do. So what I've done is I took all of the model tests that we had in our test management system and took each script and basically sliced it up every time there was a handoff. So if you have an integrated script, you might have somebody who's scheduling an appointment and then somebody different who's registering that appointment, and then we've got to go back to check that appointment in, and then we have a nurse who comes in, and then we have a physician that comes in. If I were doing manual testing, each one of those is a handoff. So I took all of our existing integrated scripts and I sliced them up based on their handoffs. I then took a look and saw how many of those scripts at the point at which I sliced it duplicated something else. So for example, there's only really one way to log into Citrix and access the EMR. There's a standard way to look up a patient. There's a standard way to address the idea that the patient that you're looking up may have a potential duplicate. There's a standard way of checking in a patient. So that allowed me to reduce the overall number of modules. Those modules that I could not code myself, I do have a a background in Epic. I used to be a REST cycle and patient access guy. But anything else, so for example, a ED clinical flow, I could say, I have these 9 steps. Can I borrow you, a build analyst, for 30, 45 minutes, maybe after your lunch? Maybe I'll make donuts available on my table first thing in the morning. Could you come in for 30 or 45 minutes, and this is all I want you to do. I just want you to do an ED triage. Or I just want you to come in as an ED physician and order 2 labs and perhaps do a charge capture on a cast or a pair of crutches or something of that nature. So I make each module as small as possible so that I never get pushback when I go to ask for a resource, because that resource commitment is rarely more than an hour, and that resource is fully committed at that time. They're not waiting in line with a bunch of other parts of the very same workflow, waiting for that scheduler to do her piece, for that ED registrar to do her piece, etc. So that's how we make it all work, with the fact that I don't have dedicated resources. What I do as the testing coordinator is then reassemble all of those modules in a way that is as reusable as possible, and on those occasions where we might have to do a new screen capture to reflect a change to the UI, I can typically do those because I already had the original picture in place.
Excellent. And that addresses another question that we had, was about the maintenance and the upkeep of your scripts. So I know that in large part from your feedback, Randy is now suggesting that we, or any users of Eggplant, are using that modular approach, breaking out the pieces, and you find that that does help reduce the time that you're spending maintaining the scripts that you have right now?
Oh, absolutely. So to go back to that Citrix piece, we at UNC recently changed which version of Citrix we were running. We moved from what I would call old school Citrix over to MyApps, with the idea that I had over a dozen scripts that needed to access Citrix, but only one piece of one script that launched Citrix that was reused by all 12 of those larger scripts. All I had to do is go in, take a couple of new pictures, add them, for those of you who are familiar with Eggplant, add them to my image collection, and suddenly all 12 of my scripts were resuscitated because I made a few lines of change within one module that was called by 12 different scripts.
Excellent. That's great. So could you tell us, Dave, a little bit more about your naming conventions and how you're using that to work with frequent changes coming from the applications that you're working on?
Sure. So what I will typically do, and I will tell you that I'm looser with my naming conventions than I might otherwise be with a different application, at least for my images, with the idea that if I forget that I have captured a particular image, Eggplant will remind me, hey, you're captured an image that looks a whole lot like this. Wouldn't you want to go ahead and use this? The other thing is that for the particular electronic medical record that I use, which is Epic, I will find that within modules, for example, the close button or the accept button or the finish button will look exactly the same in 7 different portions of the application. So if I, for example, wanted to save them as cadence finish, prelude finish, epicare finish, etc., then it might look very confusing to someone who's reading my scheduling module that somehow I'm calling the clinical finish button. So I'll typically name it for exactly what it is. Anytime I'm reading a row or a column, I'll typically say something like count row header or count column header. If there's something within the chart itself, I may say chart allergy or something of that nature. But what I've really found is that in those cases where I might be inadvertently capturing an image that I've already captured, that Eggplant is very good at tapping me on the shoulder, and I can therefore use the existing one and be less focused on the naming convention of my images. Scripts I absolutely name very tightly so that I can go back in and find out what they do. Because of some custom code that I run within Eggplant, my script names tend to have no spaces in them, so I'll use mixed case notation as I'm putting them in, and I will be incredibly verbose about what a particular script does. But in terms of images where people work very, very hard to try to use a type naming convention, I've found that the image capture tool itself is often better than I am at recognizing that an image has already been used.
Excellent. And that makes a lot of sense to have your script names very robust as you're using the modules and you'd be calling different scripts. So great. And, you know, we're running a bit short on time here, and we have quite a few other questions, but one of the ones I'd like to address today, and Dave, we can start with you here, would be what was the challenge as you were getting started testing against your EMR system? What was one of the challenges that you faced in scripting with that in Eggplant? And then how were you able to overcome that?
Sure. So when I first got started in Eggplant, both the application itself and my understanding of Eggplant was not what it is right now. That's one of those great things about Eggplant Functional is that it really has improved by leaps and bounds over time. And originally I was doing a lot of hard coding, vice, the type of use of variables that that Randy showed in his demonstration. I read and write to Excel spreadsheets in a way now that I didn't initially, and my methodology is sufficiently robust that I drop new columns in all the time as end users ask for additional information to be added at runtime. So I would say the biggest leap forward both that I use on a daily basis, both in terms of my knowledge in the app itself, is enhanced ability to read from Excel spreadsheets.
Okay, excellent. That's great. And I know that Randy has built out some videos on that as well. So that's something that we have available for sharing with others so that they can get better at using Excel and CSVs with Excel or with Eggplant. Well, great. Well, like I said, we are a bit short on time, and we do have some other questions that we'd like to address. This was the first of many. We'd like to have quite a few more of these user meetups where we have folks that are using Eggplant or folks that are interested in using it in the future get together and cover some questions. So Dave, we really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us and other users about how you're using the software. And Randy, I'd like to thank you as well for giving us a live demonstration of how to use Eggplant, covering some of the best practices and some ways to build robust and repeatable scripts. So thank you guys very much for presenting today and telling us about some of your work. And I'd like to thank everybody in the audience for joining us today and listening in. And this will be a recording that will be available for everyone. Thank you all very much for your time.